Alright you guys, so we just wrapped up the first quarter of the season, and I figured that now would be a good time to let you all get caught up with the roster so you can see everybody's rating, and also so you can get a general idea of what we need to improve moving forward. Now, for those of you who are just now tuning into the series, or if this is the first video that you're watching, my Giants franchise is sitting at 500 through the first 4 games, and we're currently last place in the NFC East. And a big reason for that is we are in full rebuild mode. There's just no other way to put it. As we take a look at the offense, you guys can kind of see why. I've got a 74 overall rookie quarterback starting for me who we just picked up in the last draft. And to no one's surprise, he's played much like you expect a rookie would in his fair share of plays. Now, I'm not going to bash him because he has made some pretty big plays and clutch moments. And if I'm not mistaken, he had a breakout game against the Chicago Bears where he threw for about 3 or 4 touchdowns or something like that. So he's definitely trending in the right direction. As for the other positions on offense that are kind of concerning to me, taking a look at center, you can see John Sullivan there as our starter, and he's been surprisingly decent over the course of the last few games, especially in the running game. He's been opening up nice holes down the middle for Saquon Barkley to run through, and hopefully he continues to play that way the entire way through the season. But at some point, I am going to need to find an upgrade because I really don't see him being a viable starter for me long term. And the same could be said for John Jerry and Isaiah Prince. Now, Prince is going to get a much longer leash than Jerry. I think I'm going to end up starting Prince next season because he's only 23 years old, and with the experience that he's getting on the field right now, hopefully that'll allow him to develop into something decent, or maybe even into a solid starting right tackle. So he's definitely going to get his share of snaps going into next season. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for John Jerry. He is clearly struggling in pass protection so far this season, and I know I'm exaggerating here when I say this, but it feels like every time I drop back, Jerry gets bull rushed 3 to 5 yards right back into my lap before just about every throw. So if you ever wonder why about 90% of my passing plays are out of gun formations, that's exactly why right there. I got to avoid the pressure somehow. But besides that, I'm pretty happy with, happy's not the right word. I'll say that I'm content with the way that the offense has been playing so far through 4 games, because I expected a lot worse as we started the series. Now, making our way over to the defensive side of the ball, this entire unit has been pretty disappointing since week 1, especially the secondary. But on top of that, we haven't been able to generate any pressure to affect the quarterback without blitzing, and that is extremely risky to do with this weak secondary. I don't mind blitzing from time to time, but I cannot blitz the entire game just to get pressure on the quarterback. Now, the idea was that once I took Nick Bosa number 2 overall in the most recent draft, that he'd come in and completely rejuvenate the front 4 and be a double-digit sack guy for the next 5 to 8 years or so. And I still believe that that's possible. It could just be that my expectations were a little bit high on Nick coming out of Ohio State, and it may just take a little bit more time than I expected, and I'm perfectly fine with that, you guys. As for my defensive tackle and right end positions, I think we're okay with Harrison and Tomlin there, but I won't be able to say the same for the linebacker positions outside of Devin White. I can definitely see a scenario where I end up picking up another middle linebacker and a right outside linebacker, and then let Olivier Vernon show what he can do for one more season. But in any case, you can expect to see upgrades along the linebacker positions because overall, their performance has been shoddy at best. Now, last but not least, I think a lot of you guys would agree that corner is a position that should definitely be upgraded because it feels like teams are able to march up and down the field on us pretty easily through the passing game, and I just don't know that Mo Claiborne, Eli Apple, or Bashard Breeland's enough to get it done. Definitely not Eli Apple, that's for sure. But I will add this as a bit of a caveat that with the way that this year's game plays in the secondary, it really makes it difficult to analyze players. Like, I can't tell if a player is out of position because he's just a bad player, or if he's out of position because the game's logic is messed up. Case in point, Darian Thompson. But with that said, I'd really like to find a corner that I can start opposite of Jenkins, and I'm just not sure that player is currently on the roster, so we're gonna have to wait until the offseason to see if we can upgrade. Now, moving on to the player negotiations for this season, you'll see that Sterling Shepard is already at the table ready to hammer out a deal, but do you see how much he's asking for? Are you kidding me? He wants a $12 million signing bonus? Who does this guy think he is? Julio Jones or somebody? I mean, come on, get real, bruh. There is no way I'm giving him that kind of money, so Shepard's days in New York might just be done. The same can pretty much be said for everybody else on this list. I mean, Gostkowski and Stewart, I definitely like them as players, but age is a factor. And Eli Apple, not a chance. But I may consider re-signing Eli Manning this season if he doesn't retire, just for sentimental purposes, because I really think he should retire a New York Giant. But ultimately, that move will come down to having available cap space, because I'd rather have a player on the roster that's going to contribute than have $7 million of dead money. So we'll see how that plays out. Now you're going to get your first look at the upcoming draft class, and the idea here is that this is going to be a needs-based draft for me. And I know I say that pretty much every single season going into the draft, and then I end up picking guys like Paris Campbell because they're the best available at the time. But I am going to try my best to stick to it this season because we do have some pretty big needs, especially along the offensive line and some other spots, so I definitely can't afford to deviate from the plan this season. Now, as we look at the quarterbacks, there really isn't a huge need there. We do need a backup, but if I do decide to draft a quarterback, it won't be until the later rounds. I'm just showing you guys so you can get a good idea of all the prospects that are available, but at first glance, this looks like it could be a pretty deep draft at quarterback. Of course, I'll come back and scout the guys that are projected to go in rounds 3 to 5, but if the pre-scout projections hold true, which they rarely do, there should be about 13 to 15 players that can come in and make an impact for me. So I'm pretty anxious to see how that's going to pan out. Another position that I'll look to address in the draft since Sterling Shepard has completely lost his mind is wide receiver. Now, the wide receiver class is extremely top heavy, as you guys will see here in just a second, but there are a lot of very solid prospects in this group. But when you think about all the other needs that we have on this roster, I really wouldn't feel great in investing a first or second round pick on a wide receiver. But let's just say, for example, a player like Ramel Mode, slotted at number 5 on your screen, happens to fall to me in the second round. If he's got the speed to match that skill set, I think that could make for a pretty difficult decision, you guys. But getting back to my point about this draft class being so top heavy, look at the drop off between rounds 2 and 5. It just craters into the later rounds. So it may be better to pull the trigger sooner than later, but I've got a lot more scouting to do, but it definitely gives us something to think about until then. Moving over to the offensive line prospects, I'm pretty content with Nate Solder holding down the left tackle spot for at least another season, but I wanted you guys to see what could be available, and so far it's kind of disappointing, to be honest. But what I may end up doing is actually selecting a right tackle from this group, and of course that'll depend on what's available for me at right tackle when I pick, but I really wouldn't mind adding a player that can add depth for both positions. Having a guy that can slide over and play some right tackle when needed, then left tackle when needed, that'll go a long way if you ask me. So now we'll shift gears a bit and take a look at the interior offensive line. Much like the left tackle spot, I am pretty content at what we have at left guard. Will Hernandez has been doing a pretty good job in pass protection and in the run game as well. So there's really no reason for me to believe that that production is just going to randomly fall off a cliff going into next season. But at the center position, I feel like this is our biggest need along the offensive line. I know I mentioned earlier in the video that John Sullivan is playing surprisingly well, but I really wouldn't bet that he continue overachieving the way that he has. That brings us to Curtis Bates here. He's the only center with the first round grade, and he's actually projected to go in the late first round, which just might work out for us. He's got B+ impact block, B run block, B lead block, and at 21 years old, he could be the guy for us long term. Besides that, there are a couple of guys that are projected to go in the second and third round that I could take a closer look at, but for right now, I'm going to keep Curtis Bates pretty high on my draft board. As for the right guard position, which is also a pretty big need for us, there isn't a lot to really get excited about here, you guys. The player that I'd likely target from this group is Jadavion Allen out of Nebraska. He's projected to go in the 4th round, which isn't nearly as expensive as Curtis Bates, but with the lack of depth in this draft class, I'd probably have to overdraft him. I highly doubt he'll be sitting there for me in the 4th round. Now, keeping this thing moving on as we take a quick look at the right tackles, you guys will see I haven't even touched the position yet in terms of scouting, but compared to the right guard position, this appears to be a much deeper class. But I'd really prefer not to have to use a draft choice on a right tackle. I'd really like to find someone in free agency that can come in and back up Isaiah Prince, or maybe even someone that'll push him for starters minutes. Either case is fine with me. But if I had to make a selection, I would pick somebody probably in the 5th or 6th round, but I'll have to get back to you guys on that after I've scouted the class here a little bit. So now we'll shift gears and talk defense a little bit. It may not seem like such a huge need, but I feel like our defense could really thrive with the addition of another young and athletic linebacker. I've only been able to scout a couple of guys to this point, and man, I just can't stop imagining what Savon Love lined up next to Devin White would look like on our defense. And the same could be said for Trey Council as well. I'm imagining both of these guys with good speed and cover skills, just being able to take away the middle of the field or the flats. It's just beautiful when you think about it. I don't know, I'm just one of those weird people that likes watching defensive football. But in all likelihood, both of these guys may end up on different rosters because I already invested a 1st round pick on Devin White last year, and besides, you never know what Jalen Lester or Spencer Green might look like. Plus, middle linebacker really isn't our biggest need right now. Speaking of pretty big needs though, we now get to look at the cornerback position. And at first glance, outside of Carroll Golston or Rashawn Blue, I'm pretty disappointed. Now here's Golston at 6'2", 193 with B+ press, B- man, and C+ zone. I really wish the zone coverage was a B- because that would really justify the projection. But as we look at Jamal Lawson or Ilyas Prolay, I guess we'll go with that. Is the difference that significant that these guys are graded 2 and 3 rounds later? I don't know that that's the case. It could be that the class is really just that weak. But the fact remains that Carroll Golston is the highest rated corner in the class, and he is projected to be a late first rounder at that, so we'll definitely have a shot at him. But I don't know, just something about that C+ ranking really doesn't sit well with me, so I could very well be looking later in the rounds for help at corner. But anyways, you guys, I think we're at a good point to going ahead and wrap this up. We're just about at the 10.5 minute mark. If you guys have made it this far in this video, first of all, shout out to you. And before you guys drop comments about it, I want you to know that I am aware that I did skip over a few positions on defense. My D-line I feel is pretty solid, so I definitely won't be addressing those in the draft. And the same goes for free safety and strong safety. I already like what I have there, so there's no need for me to waste a draft pick on those positions right now. And lastly, left and right outside linebacker are positions of need for me, and I'll be including those in the next scouting video that I make, probably a little bit before the draft. That way you guys get a better idea of what I'm doing before we get started. Anyways, you guys, I'm up against it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. I'm signing off, and I'll see you in the next one.